everybody, and welcome to another episode of Eating at a Meeting. I am here today to talk about the food allergy generation goes to work, legal challenges and opportunity. Professor D'Andra Shu is a law professor at South Texas College of Law in Houston. She researches and writes about legal issues surrounding food allergies. And I don't even remember how I found you, but I'm glad that I did. And thank you and welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm very excited to be here.
Okay, so again, I don't remember how I found you, but I did find this article, and I'm going to put it up here, this Bloomberg Law article, and I'll put the link into the chats as well. But I was reading it, and I really loved the conversation that you were having on it as it relates to what workplaces are dealing with or not dealing with as it relates to food allergies. So before we get into how you started it, tell me how you got or why you wrote it. But why did you write it? That's a good question right there. Sum it up.
Well, so I have food allergies. That may not be a big surprise. And my good friend, her daughter also has food allergies. So this is something that I kind of have been aware about, just sort of food allergy stuff for a while. And she and I were involved with an organization called FAIR, the Food Allergy Research and Education. They used to have a thing where they did an education and fundraising walk in Houston every year. And we kind of worked together on that. We did some legal work for them. But then it really, my food allergies are very mild, kind of no big deal. But my son all of a sudden developed food allergies in the 5th grade. And it was kind of a sort of a big kind of sea change in our life. And so it was kind of around the same time that I moved from law practice into academia and looking for things to write about, because that's one of the things that law professors do is we write stuff. We research and write about things. And so I heard a story about a school kid with food allergies who was being bullied at school. And I was just shocked about it. I was so dismayed. I went and talked to my son, and he fortunately had never had any kind of problems like that. But I was just like, wow. So I just started digging, and I couldn't believe how many stories and examples and things like this that I found of kids who were having problems at school. And then I found there's a study that was done in 2010 from some doctors who found that 1/3 so millions of kids have food allergies, right? 1/3 of them are bullied at school because of their food allergies. And for those kids that are bullied, half of the time, the thing that they're bullied with is what they're allergic to. So like people chasing them around with peanut butter and trying to wave it in their face, trying to rub it on them, hiding it in their desk, trying to trick them into eating it, that kind of stuff. So I just wanted to give a voice to these kids and to try to educate lawyers and judges who were dealing with these issues to kind of just sort of raise awareness. Like this is not acceptable. I'm a lawyer. There must be law stuff that we can do to try to help these kids. And so I first started with focusing on kids in school, but that then kind of naturally grew into workplace issues for me, because when I was practicing law, I had a practice background in workplace law. And so I was always kind of thinking about workplace stuff. And then it also just sort of made sense to me that with this gigantic rise in the number of kids in school that are having food allergies, those kids are growing up, they're going to go to work. And like all of these kind of problems that we have had with bullying and harassment or figuring out how to accommodate their allergies, all these problems in school, it would just make sense to me that they are going to be following them into the workplace as well. And so then I started digging into researching that. So that's kind of a long answer, but it's sort of a personal background with food allergies and kind of some shock and outrage, right? From all of these terrible things that I'm seeing and trying to figure out the different ways that it could manifest. So.
No, I totally agree. And the bullying, the kid with the bullying and the peanuts was just like last year or 2 years ago, right? Very recent. And
well, there are so many different examples of it. There's kind of one that's hot in the media right now that involves not a little kid, an older kid. He was on the varsity football team at a place in Lake Travis in Austin. And after telling his teammates on the football team that he was allergic to peanuts, that it could kill him, whatever, they decided that it would be funny to stuff a bunch of peanuts in his locker and kind of just like contaminate all of his stuff and everything. And there's actually a lawsuit that is going on about that right now. And they used as part of the authority for helping them in some of their briefing that they did for the court, they used one of the articles that I had written. And so it's like, this is why I do this.
Oh, wow.
I mean, it's so part of it is I'm just really trying to bring attention to this issue. And there's kind of a lot of complicated legal stuff that can be involved in this. And a lot of courts and judges and lawyers get the law wrong in the area that involves this. So that's part of why I want to why I write in this area and that I want to keep writing in this area. Another one of the reasons is to try to impact the development of the law, to make it clear and to make it where and it's particularly it's the laws that deal with disability discrimination that I focus on so much, because it is there are very good arguments for why food allergy should count as a disability under these statutes. And if they do, then that provides people in schools with protection. It provides people in workplaces with protection. So,
well, and when I was reading your article, that's one of the things that like you really started out with is like, you were saying that there were a lot of courts that were actually referencing legal cases that were before the ADA was amended in 2008. And
correct.
That's one of the things that I talk about a lot in my presentations is that, hey, did you know the ADA was amended and it added these words and
like
now
a long time ago it was amended and it's still a problem.
Yeah, exactly. And so your paper really pointed out that there are judges that are still referencing that back before the 2008, but there are some cases which I've covered here as well. I know you interviewed Mary Vargas, but there's some cases that are current right now that are really putting this into the forefront.
That's right. That's right. And so it is, and it doesn't mean that every person with a food allergy case that goes to court is going to win or should win or whatever, but they shouldn't just not even be able to get through the front door because the judges and the lawyers are interpreting the law wrong and don't even think that the protections of the statute apply to them. And so that's just kind of one of a big hurdles in my scholarship that I'm working on, is trying to just make that very clear and plain. I try to make it where it's helpful for any lawyers or judges who are researching this or whatever. They find my stuff and it's to lay out very clearly for them what the problems are, why they shouldn't be relying on these old cases, and what the new law and the new cases should say. And so, and I've seen some success stories with that as well, where courts have used my analysis or whatever to kind of help move in the right direction. And so that's why I'm doing this, right? Is I want to help that law get interpreted properly so that people have a chance to, if they get in one of these bad situations that I have written about, that they have a chance to go to court and get help if that's what it takes.
Well, and I thought one of the other thing, and this just popped into my head, but reading it, I thought one of the interesting points that you pointed out or shared was that if the defense attorney as well if the plaintiff doesn't know, making sure that everybody's educating each other, right?
That's right.
Because if you know this law that the ADA was amended, then you should be telling them that, hey, this applies. Right?
No, that's exactly right. But I think sometimes with our legal system, the way it is, that it's so competitive, it's so that I just think that there are people who are so focused on trying to figure out how to get their clients to win that they're not paying attention to the fact that they also have ethical duties to the court and whatever, to make sure that they are using the right law. And if the plaintiff's lawyer, if it's somebody that doesn't really understand very much about this area of the law, they kind of dabble in this area, whatever, they're not citing the right things, and that they're not, you on the defense side know that they're making a mistake, you have a duty to be able to fix that. And my kind of all theory is that, like, litigate the case within the bounds of the proper law. Be aggressive for your client, zealously advocate for them. That's great, but it has to be within the bounds of what the law actually is, and not just a mistake that the other side is making. That's not how our legal system is not going to function properly if that's the way advocates behave.
Yeah. No, so true, because you want to make sure that they're getting the right. So let's talk about responsibilities of the workplace based on the law. So we're referencing the 2008 Americans with Disabilities Act. So can you, from that legal perspective and the research that you've done, Well, I guess let's start with what are kind of the obligations that we have, that workplaces have under the ADA.
Well, there's a lot of obligations, but the one that comes up a lot in this context is that you have to provide accommodations to workers. So if workers have a disability and that disability is interfering with their ability to do their job or to be safe and just sort of an equal member of the workplace, then the employer then has an obligation to provide reasonable accommodations. And so that could be reasonable, there being the operative word, right? Because part of it is you have to kind of figure out in whatever situation you're dealing with, what is going to be reasonable in that situation. But lots of the situations that I researched and wrote about, there are just some pretty easy things that could have been done to help people in as far as providing accommodations for them. So if there was an example of a woman who worked in a pretzel factory, and she was just fine when she worked in the shipping department. And then they transferred her to the baking department, and she started having breathing problems, getting these big hives and itchy rash up her arm and all this stuff. And they couldn't figure out what was going on. They finally figured out that the powder that they used to flavor the pretzels had tomato in it. And she's allergic to tomato. So it's oh, okay, well, just put me back in baking, or not in baking, in the shipping department where I had been all that time before, and it was fine. And they're like, nope, sorry, not going to send you back there. And they're just they said, oh, just put towels over your arm, whatever. And they made her keep working in that environment. And she's like, no, I'm not going to do this. This obviously was not good for her. And that to me is just a perfect example of an easy accommodation. She worked in that area before. They can rearrange to get her back into that area where she could work perfectly safely, but the employer wouldn't do it, and ended up. I can't remember if they fired her or she quit, but that's kind of the thing that happens in a lot of these cases. Is either they get fired or the conditions are just so intolerable for the worker that they just end up quitting anyway. So reasonable accommodations is a real big thing, but also under the statute, the employers, they have a duty to prevent or to put a stop to harassment and bullying that happens in the workplace if that is happening based on someone's disability. You can't, so because the statute says you can't discriminate against someone because of their disability, what the courts say is that one way of discriminating is harassing. So it's kind of like with sexual harassment, right? That links to statutes that say you can't discriminate based on sex in the workplace. And they say sexual harassment kind of falls under that umbrella. It's the same with disability harassment. And so that's kind of part of why it's so important to establish that threshold that a disability or that a food allergy is a disability under the statute, because then that's what kicks in those different protections. So you can't be bullied or harassed based on your disability but it has to kind of be to a certain level. I mean, it's not just somebody says one thing to you one day and then you can sue them. It's not that. It has to kind of be a pattern of really bad behavior. But anyway, so the statute protects against that. It protects you from being retaliated against. So if you have complained about a supervisor who is not accommodating you, or and that supervisor then is just making your life hell at work, just nitpicking you or writing you up for things or whatever, you're protected against that. Or if they are mistreating you because they are upset about an accommodation that you got, if you were able to work it out with the employer to ban peanut butter in the workplace, and a supervisor was really, really, really upset about not getting to eat their peanut butter at work, and they made life hard for you at work, then there's possibly a retaliation claim. And there's also just protections just for you can't not hire somebody because they have a disability. You can't just fire them, just sort of be well, we see you have this food allergy here. We don't want to have to deal with it, so we're going to fire you. They can't do that either. Right. So there's a lot of different protections that are built into the statute. Again, as long as you get the threshold, right? That we can say that we get to use this statute because the food allergy is a disability.
Well, and there's so many stories that are just popping into my head across the board. I mean, the one that Mary Vargas, and I think you cited it in the paper, was about the kid who had peanut butter or peanut allergy, and his boss was putting like, hey, eat this scoop of peanut butter and let's see if you have a reaction. It was
The Panera Bread case.
Panera Bread case. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I know he quit and they ended up settling out of court, but I mean, it's those kind of things. But as a meeting planner, I'm like, I was very, very, everybody, to be honest with you, I was reading her article and I'm like looking at the footnotes and I'm like, oh my gosh, she's actually citing my work. So I wrote my blog post. So I was very, very excited, but my books and my blog post, but it is like the guy who was bullied at an awards dinner, right? And his coworker was just bothering him and trying to order for him. And like, he couldn't speak. I mean, this man was 50 something years old. He can speak for himself. And he came and ate at the staff table because he wanted to get away from this guy. And I don't know if that bullying went on outside of that event. So I don't know the level of that, but I'm like, this is a 50-year-old man who's getting harassed by a coworker for that. And it's kind of humiliating and embarrassing.
Absolutely, it is. And to me, it's trying to kind of try to get to the bottom of like, why do people do this? And I think that there are just some jerks in the world. Like, we know that, right? It just kind of be the way it is. But I think also that a lot of times what happens is that there's a lot of ignorance surrounding food allergies that leads people to kind of treat it in a much more casual manner than they would otherwise if they understood some serious things. Because there are some very serious things about food allergies that most people don't realize, which is like that food allergy reactions can kill you, right? And that food allergy reactions are unpredictable. You can have a mild problem one time, and then the next time it could be full-on life-threatening. And that the medicines that you take to help you with that don't always work. There are definitely some very scary stories of people who have used their EpiPens and they still died from their allergic reactions. And another piece of it that a lot of people don't get is that just the tiniest smidge of eating something that you're allergic to can cause problems. Like one of the studies that I cite in my paper found that people were having reactions to 1/50th of a peanut. That's a crumb, right? That's just a crumb, or that's a spoon that was dipped into one thing and then dipped into another thing, or a splatter or whatever. So people with food allergies, they are constantly worried about accidentally ingesting something. It's not just sort of oh, woe is me, I wish I could eat that Reese's or whatever. That's the way my son was for about a week after his diagnosis. And then he was just like, I just want to know what I'm eating. I just want to make sure to understand that what I'm eating is safe, right? But anyway, so it's that accidental ingestion and the tiny little bit can matter. But then a further thing that most people don't get is that there are a lot of people who can have reactions just from smelling the thing that they're allergic to or touching it. And so having the food around can be really dangerous and also really stressful for the people that have food allergies. And so you've got that, but then people not understanding it, right? So people think like, oh, it's not that big of a deal. Oh, you little snowflakes, like nobody was allergic to peanut butter when I was a kid, right? So they think that it's just kind of all a bunch of hooey, or they think that you are faking or whatever, or they're just like a little tiny bit of something isn't going to hurt you. This isn't a big deal. Or just don't eat it, right? Why does it matter? Why do you care what I have when you just don't eat it and you'll be fine? But it's not that easy, right? So there are those problems. And then also, I think we're really in a kind of a time of a real lack of community mindedness. It kind of relates to kind of like the same problem when we were during COVID asking people to wear masks, not necessarily only just for their own sake, but for the sake of people who were immunocompromised or whatever. And people were just like, nope, not going to do it. That's your problem, not my problem. There's a lot of that same kind of thing that happens with food allergies. And they think that they think like they have a right to eat whatever they want to. And so they view sort of any restrictions on their eating to make somebody else safe as unjustified. They wanted to, some people even like call it reverse discrimination and that sort of thing. So I think there are some rough attitudes that are going to be really hard to fix, but I think there's a lot of it that is rooted in ignorance. And so again, that's part of why I do what I do, is to try to get as much information about this out there in the world so that maybe employers can realize that it is like, this is a big deal. Like, you have to take this seriously.
Well, I just went to the FACT conference, Digital Influencer Conference, and I know that man. I'm in the Delta Sky Club, everybody. But the allergists that we're talking about, right? That we're talking about current research on food allergies and whatever, they're actually doing the tests on their patients in their offices, and they're only giving them that crumb to see the amount of reaction. They're not giving them, hey, here's a handful of peanuts, just ingest them. They're giving them the small amount of peanut, like you were mentioning, to see what that reaction is. And so it's not just what we're doing, that it's the crumb that's on the table in your staff cafeteria, right? I mean, this is what people, the allergists are actually doing as well, is just giving that little minute piece of it. And just talking about that, the nuts on the table, there was a woman at a conference this summer who had educated or informed the event planner that she had a hazelnut allergy. And like, she couldn't be in the room with it. She couldn't touch it. And she was looking at these brownies that were being served. And the server's like, she's like, what kind of nuts are those? And the server's like, those are walnuts. But she's like, no, those look like hazelnuts as well. And the chef was right behind that server and said, yes, ma'am, those are hazelnuts. And people are eating brownies. They don't eat brownies with forks. They're eating brownies with their hands. So she was a bit scared to walk around this conference and shake anyone's hand or put her hands on a coffee table or whatever. And she was really annoyed. She sent me a LinkedIn message. She had sat in my education assistant and sent me a LinkedIn message to tell me this, and was really annoyed that it wasn't thought through all the way when she educated them on her needs. So with that story in mind, what can workplaces do to help mitigate those risks? Banning peanuts, you said that you're banning nuts from your offices, but are there other things that you've seen companies do to help their employees?
Well, I think that so much of it comes down to education and having a top-down understanding that this is a serious situation, right? That this isn't somebody just sort of being whiny and annoying or whatever, but that there are some real health and safety issues that are involved, and some real physical danger that's involved as well. And so I think that if employers understand the medical situation and take it seriously, and then understand that they have legal obligations that are around that as well. So you start at the top and then educate supervisors and the workforce. I mean, there's so many things that we train employees on, that you're always having to take the sexual harassment training, the how to not get scammed by this kind of email sort of thing, whatever, our ethics policies or whatever. There's no reason that you couldn't do food inclusivity as part of that training. And it's really not, and it's not just about food allergies necessarily. And I think that's another thing that can help as well, is that there are all kinds of eating issues in the workplace. It could be that people have food issues that relate to dietary preferences, like being a vegetarian or vegan, or there are other medical conditions, like if you have diabetes, there are definitely some big eating restrictions that you have, or religious issues that people have certain dietary needs based on their religion. And so I think that everybody should feel safe in the workplace and feel included in the workplace. And I think that if you kind of take it seriously, that you kind of recognize that food is kind of there are lots of tentacles about the way that it can sort of impact people in the workplace and cause some real danger and stress for people. I think if you kind of get that in your head and try to have a work culture that is just, accepting and inclusive of that kind of stuff. And I mean, I think a lot of workplaces I mean, certainly there is bullying, not just about food allergies, but all kinds of, there are some toxic workplaces. We all know that, right? But I think as a general matter, you ask supervisors or managers or whatever, they would say that they wouldn't tolerate bullying or mistreatment or whatever that they're not going to tolerate sexual harassment or whatever. Well, then why are you tolerating disability harassment, right? I think that it's kind of the mental focus of that. So I think that it's really a top-down education thing and being proactive. That's another thing, is that I don't think you wait until there's some big problem with an employee and their food allergies in their workplace for you to figure out what to do about it, right? Because statistically speaking, so like 11% of adults have a food allergy. I mean, that's millions of people. And the numbers are going up, 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 up. All of these kids that are growing up and getting into the work, becoming adults, getting into the workplace, the numbers are just skyrocketing. If you don't already, you as an employer, if you don't already have an allergic employee in your workplace, you're going to, right? Just statistically speaking, it's going to happen. So prepare for it.
You might already do, and you don't even know because you don't ask that question.
Well, that's right. And somebody doesn't feel like that they don't feel like the environment is welcoming in a sense for them to be able to go and talk about that. So that's exactly right. You may have one and don't know it. Or if you don't, you're probably going to have one soon. So get ready for it, get ahead of it. Right. And there's just, with so many food things that happen at work, I think that it would not be that difficult to just sort of have a mindset of, we're going to let employees have input on what our food is going to be. Right. And so you deal, and maybe that's for a religious reason. Maybe that's for accommodating vegetarians or people that have food allergies or whatever. But just you sort of like, this is part of our work culture. This is how that it's going to be, is that we want to make sure that the food that happens in this workplace is something that is safe and appropriate for everybody. And so I think there's a lot of mindset involved in that.
Yeah. There was a woman I chatted with, I think for the book, You at Work. It was either Humans at Work or You at Work. I don't remember which one specifically. And she was in HR, and she talked about how she had that person with food allergies be on the planning committee for the company party so that she could help navigate the food and beverage that's being offered and educate the planning team on that. And and that employee felt so welcomed and so included in that event. Whereas then I've got other ones that another woman I spoke to were like, oh, we did that for you one time. You can't do that again. Meaning we allowed you to bring your own food in, or we ordered you food. And actually somebody said that to me. Hey, Tracy, we've ordered you food from this pizza place over here, but we can't do that. We can't reimburse you for that. But we're going to order pizza for everyone else. I'm like, no. I'm like, hello.
That's not how this works.
No.
That's exactly right. Yeah. And having people involved in that decision making, that's so important. And there's one of the examples that I wrote about involves a guy who they were planning a Thanksgiving event for their company. They were going out to a hibachi restaurant, and he like repeatedly was just like, it was a seafood allergy. Can't do this. Okay. Gets there. And then, but nobody followed through with it. And so he had to get up and leave because the hibachi thing is happening. And then all of a sudden here comes the shrimp, and the guy had to get up and walk out on the company Thanksgiving celebration. And he had done what he thought that he could, raise the issue and whatever. And it just, nobody paid attention to it.
And how does that just boggles my mind. But you and I are in this world, and so we're having to educate people on what this is. But how does this really just tie in general to the framework of just human rights and equality when it comes to eating as well as to being at work?
So, I mean, I think about this for kids and adults both, because it's a very similar kind of thing. So for kids, their waking hours, where are they most of the time? More proportionate than anybody else, or any place else, school, right? And then adults, for their waking hours, proportionately, they're at the workplace. Both of those settings, there is food everywhere all the time. I mean, just so kind of as a general matter, in school, you've got your lunches, but breakfast, you've got snacks, you've got class parties, you've got field trips, you've got traveling sports things, you've got arts and crafts and science things. There's so many ways that food is involved. And workplace, same thing, right? Because most people have their work shift include and covers at least one meal. And so you've got lunch issues, you've got employers that provide food, you've got people that have to deal with food as part of their job responsibilities. Maybe they have to take clients out for interviewing or entertaining, or they have to be the one that sets up the food in the break room for the people, to celebrate so-and-so's birthday this month. There are just a million different ways, right? And so if you think about all of that food that's in both of those places where people spend so much of their time, and we know statistically that there are people with food allergies that are there or going to be there, then there's a lot of anxiety and stress around that. And I think that is, to me, that's a real equity issue, because I think that a kid should be able to just focus on their schoolwork, right? And not focus on being scared about if somebody is going to try to hide a peanut butter cookie in their lunchbox. And that the employee who is just constantly worried about everybody who's eating the clam chowder in the microwave and whatever, they're not able to focus and do their work. And so there's physical dangers that happen not as often, but the stress around that happens all the time. There's quite a psychological toll of just trying to manage and keep yourself safe. And if you're in an environment that's not supportive of that, it is completely undermining the purpose of you being there. You're not going to be a good employee. You're not going to be a good student.
Right.
And so I think that just is automatically disadvantaging those people. And so I view that as a real kind of equity and inclusion issue.
So, all right, thinking workplace cafeteria, right? And then I'm going to say the lack of laws or regulations here in the U.S. on labeling unpackaged food, like that company cafeteria or a buffet at a hotel or convention center. It has to be labeled on the packaged food, but not on the unpackaged. So where does the responsibility lie? Like, I'm Thrive meetings and events and eating at a meeting, and I have my company cafeteria. Do I put the regulations on the company I hire to do the catering? Or is it the catering company says, hey, this is what I need to be doing? I mean, but there's only a few states that are actually requiring that now. So how does that mesh with to me, it seems like it might be hard for the employer to manage that when there's no regulations around that food labeling. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. So that's another area that I am intending to get into writing about at some point, because our food labeling laws are not good. It's kind of the Wild West in a lot of areas. And so I think that you are right. And I don't know where the ultimate responsibility lies in some of those circumstances. But I know that the situations that I have seen that involve cafeterias have been pretty egregious things that could have been where it seems like there are some changes that could have been made. So there's somebody who with a seafood allergy. This cafeteria, they were always serving seafood, and which I'm just like, that's not this expensive. What workplace is this that's constantly serving seafood for lunch? But I think that they're in a situation like that it could have been that there is a schedule that seafood is only going to be served on these certain days. And on those days, maybe that's a day that you're working remotely or something like that, right? Where you're not completely taking away the seafood from the other employees, but you're removing the person who is very sensitive to the smell of seafood from having to be in that environment at that time. So that's one. There's another person where the employer had a cafeteria and required them to eat in the cafeteria. She needed gluten-free food, and there was no provision from the cafeteria food to have that food be gluten-free. And so she was just like, let me bring my own lunch. And the employer wouldn't let her bring her own lunch, which that's just such a head scratcher, right? Yeah. So I think that there are some very tricky issues that involve cafeterias and things like that. So I agree with you there, but I think there are also some that really aren't very tricky at all, right? And so if somebody is wanting to bring in their own food and perhaps you're reimbursing them a little bit for that because everybody else is getting the employee benefit of free food, free lunch, right? And this person, you're not willing to work with the cafeteria vendor or whatever to make sure that person can eat, then so they have to bring their own food. So maybe they get some sort of a lunch allowance or something like that. I think there are creative solutions that can be had.
Yep. Well, and my Amanda Eckes, who is in food service, when she worked at a technology company managing their food and beverage, that's what she did. She ended up asking all the employees, working with the company to get all the employees' food allergies. And then they made sure they labeled for all of those, even outside of the top 9. But she also got approval to use all halal certified meats, so that, because this is a tech company, so there was a lot of Muslims that were there, so they were able to eat in the company cafeteria for the same reasons. But then one person started working there who is kosher, and sat down with that person and talked through what they could and couldn't eat, what they felt comfortable with, and she couldn't end up accommodating those needs through the company cafeteria. So the company ended up giving him a subsidy because the breakfast and lunches were free. They wanted to make sure that he had something to pay for bring his own food in for breakfast and lunch. Yeah.
Right. So to me, that's one of the hallmarks of the way that the ADA is supposed to work is called the interactive process. It's supposed to be the employer and the worker are sitting down, talking it out, and trying to not heavy-handing each other, right? But it's supposed to be like, let's try to figure out what is something reasonable that we can do here. So, and that sounds like a good example of that, because it sounds like the employer tried to work it out where they could provide food. They inquired in it. It wasn't going to work, but they came up with another solution. So it's not perfect. Obviously, that puts a little burden on that employee to have to bring his own food as opposed to it being provided there. But it's kind of the thing with lots of compromises, right? It's not always necessarily about just finding like that it's going to be perfect for every side. And so doing that, they tried for what he wanted. They weren't able to do it, and they found a way to compensate for him instead. And I think that's what you have to do. But it requires an employer to be open and willing to do that, to understand that they have legal obligations, that they should be doing that, and that it is serious and important. And there, it's not a life and death issue, but it's certainly a matter of just that employees, comfort and just their ability to feel included and be a good worker, right? Employers want their employees to be productive, right? And I mean, happy workers are productive workers. There's a lot of employer self-interest that could be had here by just taking some small steps towards food inclusivity for not just food allergies, but people with all kinds of food issues.
Exactly. Now, I want to jump back to something you said about the hiring process. And I'm thinking about that HR manager, or that even the manager that's going to hire you, that you're going to work for, but also that person that's interviewing. What advice would you give someone with a food allergy or celiac disease, that hiring process, but then also if they get hired, if they feel unsafe or unsupported in the workplace? I guess that's two different scenarios completely. Is like in that interview process, but then also once you're hired, if you feel unsafe, what do you do?
Okay. So in the interview process, there are definitely some rules in place about what employers can or can't ask you about medical conditions before you're hired, because part of it is eventually those things will come out, assuming that your medical conditions are related to something in the workplace. But the idea is that you shouldn't have to be forced to disclose that stuff early on, because it would make it too easy for employers to get by with coming up with some reason not to hire you, but the real reason is because of your disability. And so if you don't have a kind of a disability that is an obvious kind of thing, then you don't have a duty to disclose that early on. Some people do, because they're like, look, I want to be very upfront with this about the beginning, because if I'm going to be in a place that is going to be reluctant to have me around because of my food allergy, I don't want to be there. And so some people have kind of taken a very aggressive approach to sort of putting it on the table from the beginning. And the idea is if they're going to be illegal towards me, then whatever, let them be illegal towards me, but I don't want to be there anyway. Right. So there's kind of some tricky things that are there. But then what will happen sometimes is then as the hiring process goes on, like you have made like a conditional offer of employment. So it's like, we're going to hire you, assuming you pass all this and this screening and all the drug tests and whatever else that they give you. So at that point, when you have a conditional offer, then more information can be disclosed. And this is what happened with a woman who was working at a children's hospital in Boston and kind of working in their outpatient dental department. So it was during that process that she disclosed that she had a nut allergy because there was a medical form she was filling out, and she said whatever. And she wasn't even requesting an accommodation because her work area was not in a place where she was going to really have any interaction with any nut products or whatever.
Right.
And the employer, they were like, we are not going to hire you because we don't think that we can provide you with a safe enough environment. And she's like, look, I've had this kind of job for a long time in other places. Like, I think I'm not asking you for an accommodation at this point. I just want to come in and be able to do this job. And the employer was like, no, we know best. We're not going to hire you. Can't do that. That's not appropriate. So, but if you get past all that and you're in the workplace and you're feeling unsupported or unsafe, I think that my biggest piece of advice would be to don't suffer in silence, because it's not gonna get any better if you don't talk about it, right? So if it's coworkers that are giving you the problem, then you go to management. If it's management, obviously that can be a lot more difficult. Hopefully there's some place, some farther up the line where you can escalate that. But it is to talk to somebody, to try to get other people involved. But I think that it's good to try to be helpful, like to try to offer solutions, not just complaints, right? And to try to educate the people about the seriousness of your situation and that sort of thing. Because on the theory that maybe that the resistance that you're having, the problems that you're having are rooted in ignorance as opposed to malice. And if they're rooted in ignorance, then maybe you can kind of take some steps to help alleviate that ignorance. And then maybe things will be better. But, if it's really bad, maybe you have to change jobs. Maybe you go see Mary Vargas, right? I mean, there's legal help that's out there that you may have to get. But hopefully talking to people as reasonable human beings and educating them can help people make some good progress.
Well, and I think, it comes back to that whole thing that you've said a couple of times, and I'm hearing it, and it's education. It's like, you don't know what it's like to live without a food allergy. So just ask some questions, right? Walk in their shoes or go a week with eating without what their allergen is, right? And see how challenging that is, right?
That's right.
Right. Yeah. My friend Joan has done sessions where she's at meeting planning things. Is like, okay, so you use a scooter for this conference. You put an eye patch on, or you put in earplugs. Thank you. And then, or pretend like, and go through the conference like you have a food allergy, and just see what that experience is, so that you can actually understand it fully, right? I mean, not completely fully, but you have a better idea of how it is. Yeah.
Yeah. And I've told people sometimes, I said, how comfortable would you feel if you were eating a meal and right in front of your plate was a big old pile of rat poison? Would you feel comfortable sitting there? Because that's like, for someone like with a food allergy, right? That big plate of peanuts right there next to that, whatever, that's like rat poison to them, right? That is equally as dangerous. Would you feel comfortable just sort of like being around with that in your workplace, in your food, in your eating area or whatever? You probably wouldn't. Right. And so I've had that little scenario kind of make some people kind of scratch their heads a little bit and like, okay, I guess let's see what you're talking about. So
yeah, we need more people to scratch their heads. Okay,
right.
So I actually have to run and get on a plane, but I have one more question to you.
Okay,
question for you. But what does, in the context of your paper, and I'm going to put this up here too, what does a safe, sustainable, and inclusive food and beverage experience look like to you when you're talking about accessibility and around food allergies in the workplace?
So I think it kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier. It's just having the people that have the food issues involved in the process, right? And so because we want them to feel safe, we want them to feel comfortable, we want them to feel included. That is what's going to make them an equally productive member of the workforce, just like anybody else. And so if we are educating people about the seriousness of the problem, and we are involving the people with the food issues in the planning that relates to food in the workplace, then they're going to feel a lot better. They're going to feel a lot safer. They're going to be more loyal to you, to the employer. They're going to be more productive, and it's just going to be an overall much better experience. So I think education and including them in the planning are the key things.
I like that. Thank you. All right. Well, DeAndra, thank you so much for being here. I'm going to show your LinkedIn profile. You can connect with DeAndra on LinkedIn at that address there. I'll put it in the link in the comments as well. Thank you so much for joining me. And what's just one other final point that you just want? I think it is education, but anything else you want to tell an employer about this?
I think the key thing is being proactive. Don't wait until you have a big problem with somebody that is having allergic reactions in your workplace and you don't know what to do about this or whatever. I think it's coming. If it's not already there, get ahead of it, be proactive.
Awesome. Very cool. Thank you very much for being here. And everyone, I have actually, because we're coming to the end of the year, I've created a survey about the show. And if you can take this survey for me to let me know what you like about the show, how often you listen, et cetera, I want to improve for 2025 and figure out who you want to have me interview on the show in next year. So I appreciate it if you take that survey. And DeAndra, I'm wishing you a safe and happy holidays. And I'm flying to Houston right now. Too bad I can't see you in person.
Yeah, indeed. Well, yes. Safe and happy holidays to you too.
Okay, thanks. And everybody stay safe and eat well. Until next time. Thanks.
All right, thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks for listening to the Eating at a Meeting podcast, where every meal matters. I'm Tracy Stuckrath, your food and beverage inclusion expert. Call me and let's get started right now on creating safe and inclusive food and beverage experiences for your customers, your employees, and your communities. Share the podcast with your friends and colleagues at our Eating at a Meeting Facebook page and on all podcast platforms. To learn more about me and receive valuable information, go to tracystuckrath.com. And if you'd like more information on how to feed engagement, nourish inclusion, and bolster your bottom line, then visit eatingatameeting.com.